But that's kind of something to keep in mind is why is it the case? Now, for me, one of the things that I keep an eye on is public trust in scientists and positive views and what have you. And Pew is one of the public polling ones that I've noticed has somewhat of a longer record of it, though it's certainly not the only one. And obviously, all polls are different, a little bit different in what they do. So it's good to look at more than one. But what I'm more concerned actually with is the trend here. So this came out recently, having to do with polling in October regarding Americans' trust in scientists and positive views of scientific science itself, which is important to note. Here, let us take a look. There's some interesting things when I went through this. A new Pew Research Center survey finds the share of Americans who say science has had a mostly positive effect on society has fallen, and there has been a continued decline in public trust in scientists. In this report, we cover trust in scientists and other groups, views of the impacts of science on society, and support for government investments in science. Key findings with this: fewer Americans now say science has had a mostly positive effect on society. Now, gotta emphasize this. This is still a majority here with this particular note on the public trust in, not public trust, but what people now think of science as opposed to what's really grown the most in all of this has been sort of the equal parts positive and negative in this. But 57% of Americans say that science has had a mostly positive effect on society. Share is down 8 percentage points since November of 2021 and down 16 points since before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. When it comes to the standing of scientists, 73% of adults have a great deal or fair amount of confidence in scientists to act in the public's best interests. But trust in scientists is 14 points lower than it was at the early stages of the pandemic. The share expressing the strongest level of trust in scientists, saying they have a great deal of confidence in them, has fallen from 39% in 2020 to 23% today. As trust in scientists has fallen, distrust has grown. Roughly a quarter of Americans say they say they have not too much or no confidence in scientists to act in the public's best interests, up from 12% in April of 2020. Ratings of medical scientists mirror the trend seen in ratings of scientists generally. Read Chapter 1. Okay. Why does public trust in scientists matter? Now, I'm actually glad that Pew put something like this in here. People with greater trust in scientists are more likely to align their own beliefs and actions with expert guidance and understanding. It's actually not necessarily the reason I would give, but let me finish that first. For instance, those with high trust are more likely to have gotten vaccines for COVID-19 and the flu. They are also more likely to say human activity contributes to climate change. In addition, scientific leaders are concerned that differences in levels of trust by things like party identification, race and ethnicity, and education could contribute to the benefits of science being spread unevenly across society. Here's why I have my concerns with public trust in scientists and why I think so highly of it. Think about it and what's going on with that. Whether we realize it or not, a lot of us do trust scientists. Why? Because we're the arbiters, supposedly. We go after the truth. And often that means pissing everybody off, essentially. But here's the thing. That comes with a certain amount of power. What you say has a lot of weight if you are the one who is basically involved in determining what the truth is or helping to determine what the truth is. And it's more than a little concerning when it erodes, that when public trust in scientists erodes, because well, then we're not necessarily, as a society, working in a reality based situation when we're not interested in figuring out what the truth is. And of course, what causes public trust in science to erode and scientists to erode, more appropriately, public trust in scientists specifically to erode, is an interesting question. I don't know that that's necessarily been the why of that has been so well answered, and it has been my concern. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit more in a minute. I have another link here that I think is relevant, but needless to say, public trust in scientists to me matter a little bit more so because, well, what are we talking about? We are talking about those folks who have, we're talking about scientists who should be invested in figuring out what the truth is. And because they're invested in that, they're often invested with a great deal of power in the sense that their words have weight and lots of weight in a lot of kinds of decisions. Now, is it the only thing that's used in making a decision? Of course not, and it should never be. But we do rely on a lot of people who are scientists in one form or another, whether it be a medical doctor, what have you, because they're about getting at the truth, not their own interests, or at least they should be. And so public trust in scientists matter for that reasons, because we have a lot of scientists who it is their job to figure out what the truth is. But if that is not what they are doing, then trust in that person or a group of people is misplaced, and it can be quite shattered. And in which case, it throws things into chaos when we're supposed to be perhaps working as a reality-based society, per the writings of Jonathan Rauch as an example. The Pew Center survey of 8,842 U.S. adults was conducted September 25th to October 1st, finds that, despite recent declines in ratings, scientists and medical scientists continue to be held in high regard compared with other prominent groups in society. Similar shares of Americans express confidence in business leaders, religious leaders, journalists, and elected officials to act in the public's best interests. As with scientists, most of these groups have seen their ratings decline in recent years. Americans express low trust in the federal government and other institutions like Congress for decades. And political polarization, the widening gap of views between Republicans and Democrats across a broad range of issues and attitudes, has come to be a dominant feature of American political life. Now, this graphic, yes, the decline in percentage of U.S. adults who have a certain amount of confidence in scientists to act in the best interests of the public. Which a note on this: what is a scientist's role is about getting at the truth, and that is in the best interest of the public to have that. So this is example of the decline, and yeah. This is one thing to bear in mind. As much as there is a decline that is disturbing, don't get me wrong, it is a concern to me. There's actually still a super majority of Americans who have either a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in scientists in the in this country. And yet, it is important to note, that despite, I've had a long day, recording this long day. Anyway, it's important to note one thing with this. Yes, there has been a steep drop-off amongst Republicans. I'm not going to deny it. But there has actually also been a smaller but not insignificant drop-off in Democrats, actually, and more left-leaning individuals who are having a increasing level of distrust in science. They're having less trust in scientists, rather, I should say. Confidence in scientists has also moved lower among Democrats. The share of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents with a great deal of confidence in scientists, which initially rose in the pandemic's first year, now stands at 37%, down from a high of 55% in November 2020. But unlike Republicans, a large majority of Democrats continue to express at least a fair amount of confidence in scientists to act in the public's best interests. The overall differences in partisan views remain much more pronounced today than they were prior to the coronavirus outbreak. One of the starkest illustrations of polarization in views of science is in the drop in the share of Republicans who view the societal impact of science positively. And that's where this graphic comes in, and they're talking about um, Republicans turn much less positive on science's impact on society. So this has dropped off to now less than half of Republicans. But what is far more interesting to me is that this number in the middle is probably also um, is also a smaller number than you think. A majority of Democrats continue to say that science is a mostly positive effect on society, though this share is 8 points lower than it was in 2019. Republicans were largely critical of the country's response to the coronavirus outbreak. For instance, large shares said too little priority was given to respecting individuals' choices, supporting businesses and economic activity, and meeting the needs of K 12 students. In addition, many Republicans felt that public health officials' personal views had too much influence on policy and that officials were too quick to dismiss views that challenged their scientific understanding. I gotta point to this out in that it is not that this is where I have my sincerest concerns about the amount of activists that get involved in science. Um, because you are going to be potentially allowing your views to be influencing your research and your statements and all of these other kinds of things rather than the evidence that's there and the scientific understanding that is drawn from that. And people are quite capable of seeing that. So I don't think this is an unreal thing here. That said, I really want to see more of a why to this. I always look at these surveys and I'm wondering, why is that? What's going on? Why is that? Pew is making some guesses on why, to be honest. They probably didn't do as much, although they apparently did do a little bit in terms of asking people, why are they thinking that? Why are they saying that? Fair. Good. Appreciate that. Needs to be more thoroughly done. I don't think it is very thoroughly done necessarily. Again, question for the social scientists more than me. It has been a long day. Excuse me. Despite declines in rating of scientists and science, a large majority of Americans continue to see government investments in science as worthwhile. And most place at least some importance on the United States being a world leader in scientific achievements. Now, this is different because being a world leader in scientific achievements doesn't necessarily mean it has to come from the government to pay for it. I don't necessarily view those two questions as being appropriately connected to each other. Let's put it that way. Government investments in research are worthwhile over time. So there's a 2% in here that are kind of like, whatever. Let's see. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in here when I was flipping through this. And again, my point in this is that, scientists have a tremendous amount of authority by virtue of what they tell us of science is to get at the truth. Public trust in scientists is important just for that reason. There's a lot of authority that comes from the notion in a reality-based community. There's a lot of authority that comes from the notion that there are folks interested in after what the truth is, and multiple groups and folks interested in after what the truth is, and hence they are challenging each other to check and mitigate any of their biases and along that line, which is why you need diversity of viewpoints involved in a scientific discipline, so long as, of course, you're following the process of following the scientific process and scientific method and all that. Anyway. But there's a lot of this kind of thing, and you can see it here with the different groups here that they surveyed about, be it the military or medical scientists or just scientists generally, versus police officers, which public school principals, religious leaders, journalists. I'm not gonna lie, I chuckle a little bit to see that the journalist number is that low. And of course business leaders and indeed our elected officials. Um, and there's a lot of folks that they are more, more educated. Apparently, it's having that, and so there's a lot to explore in here. I won't belabor the point, but again, I come back to the thing. Pew really didn't do it. They're showing a lot of correlative things that this group thinks this way, and this group is, well, not thinks that way, but this group polled this way, and this group polled that way, and all this other kind of stuff. Um, and so it's fascinating to look at, but of course, it ignores the notion of why. And there are some interesting things that have come up in literature about why it may be the case. So just scrolling through here to make sure, let you all know, but I will link to the top line and you all can go look. But I'm not the only one, of course, that this has occurred to, that, public trust in scientists has fallen a fair bit in the last few years. Again, still a super majority of Americans think scientists are a good thing and acting in the public's interest. But I noticed something. Oh gosh. In that some folks are looking at the why as being it's because somebody else. From the college fix, professors lament distrust in expertise, blame right-wing agendas. Expertise is premised on the understanding that not all opinions are equally valid. A pair of Arizona State University professors recently penned an op-ed in which they tell college administrators enough with the free speech rhetoric. How come? Because such concedes too much to right-wing agendas. Richard Amesbury, religious studies and philosophy, and Catherine O'Donnell, history, argue that, quote, greater freedom of speech on campuses, however well-intentioned, risks undermining college's central purpose, namely the production of expert knowledge and understanding. Wrong again, it's the pursuit of the truth. Expertise requires freedom of speech, they say, but it is the result of a process of winnowing and refinement that is premised on the understanding that not all opinions are equally valid. That is not the correct premise. That's coming at it from a social sciences perspective, but that's not the correct premise if you're thinking about it from just a scientific perspective. Let's put it this way. Think about it as a funnel. You have everybody with all their different random ideas, crazy ideas, good ideas, what have you. And they're all thrown into the funnel at the top, regardless of how wild they are, regardless of all this and what have you. But at the end, what gets accepted has to make it through the funnel. And why does it get thrown out of the funnel? If it's working appropriately, why it gets thrown out of the funnel is whether or not it matches up with any amount of reality, whether or not it connects with prior knowledge that we have, and the like. It's not that the opinion is invalid. It's that it's not factual. That it is not connected with factual reality. That is not what these professors are necessarily saying. But at the moment, a lot of knowledge, particularly though not exclusively in the humanities, while the product of rigorous and reliable disciplines, isn't publicly perceived as authoritative. In many cases, experts enjoy no special public esteem. No doubt much of this is deliberate, the result of political efforts to delegitimize certain disciplines, as is evident in the study of race and gender. But well-meaning administrators contribute to the problem when they portray the college, or the part of the college that includes the humanities, as a public sphere, speaker's corner, or a marketplace of ideas. But it's a pretty wild piece, because I did read the larger piece that shows up in the Chronicle of Higher Education, if I recall correctly. But here's the thing. It's easy when we're talking about the decline in trust in scientists. It would be easy to do something like this and to just blame right-wing agendas, or blame left-wing agendas. Blame any agenda. Blame the propagandists. It'd be easy to do that. It's harder to look at what did our discipline do this discipline do? What did the major mouthpieces of the discipline do um, to cause that distrust to form? Thinking of public health, the one that comes to mind primarily is Anthony Fauci, who basically declared himself, I am the science, and the Emperor Palpatine memes were hysterical. I'm not gonna lie. That was actually quite hysterical when I saw those a couple of years ago, because I was looking at that myself and like, you might be good at what you do, but when you're declaring yourself to be the be all and end all, which is inadvertently what he did in that interview, that does not engender trust from the public. I'm sorry, that doesn't engender that in the slightest. And indeed, for a lot of people, it may have turned them off. Now, my point with this is not to say that I know that is caused by this or it's caused by that or what have you. That's not the point of what I'm trying to say. My point is more so that it is easy to blame outside influences, and there are that. I'm not going to deny that. But it is much harder to look at what you and your own discipline have been doing such that you lose that trust. And the reason I'm talking about it from a Pew poll at a college Fix article is essentially because I have seen very little in terms of the literature for those particular disciplines. And I could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Very little in the literature for those disciplines that actually dives into why different groups distrust a discipline, or specifically, or just generally scientists in general, or why not. And I suspect that for the decline that was apparent in here, yeah, with this particular graphic, with the decline that's apparent in here, I think it's for very different reasons for both groups. To see it drop off in one group and another, both of them since 2019. And here it says to me it might be for very different reasons, and unfortunately they didn't get into why it is with the Democratic ones in the Pew poll, or didn't try to anyway. But that's kind of something to keep in mind, is why is it the case? Now, for me, I have a tendency to think, from what I have read and what have you, that the amount of activism that has gotten into certain scientific disciplines is in part to blame, because I do think people can see that and don't necessarily. My point with all of this is quite simple, in that there's a lot of questions about why this particularly is, that I think remains somewhat unexplored. And it is easy to look outwardly at the other things in messaging and what have you. And it is true that a lot of messaging about science does not come from scientists themselves. Most folks don't read journal articles. Most folks don't get into all of that, and they get it through the filter of news media. Okay, fine. Or the filter of different mouthpieces. But I still want to see more on assessment of why public trust in scientists has fallen off quite a lot in the last few years, actually. But yeah, that's it for now. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way at the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrienne, everybody. Make sure you stay curious.